Welcome to this explainer on the Market Square Mystic. All right, I want you to picture a society for a second. Imagine a world where consumerism and materialism just seem to dominate absolutely everything. You've got older generations looking on, totally alarmed as civic and religious institutions basically crumble before their eyes, while younger folks are looking at the future with this deep, heavy sense of foreboding. Politicians appear entirely self-interested, business people seem increasingly corrupt, and there's just this pervasive, heavy sense of alienation hanging in the air. Well, sounds like a rather bleak, but maybe kind of familiar assessment of our modern world, doesn't it? Well, here is the Trojan horse twist. The society I just described, yeah, it isn't 21st century America. We are actually talking about 14th century Germany. I know, right? But the societal despair is practically identical. Back then, feeling completely battered by the world around them, everyday people started desperately searching for a profound, direct connection to the divine. Why? Because the traditional institutions simply weren't cutting it anymore. They needed a radical solution, and the source material we're exploring today reveals that the answer they found back then is absolutely just as urgent for us today. Okay, let's dive into this. The solution that emerged back then wasn't to just throw your hands up, run away, and hide in a cave somewhere. Instead, it was this really radical concept called an activist mysticism of dynamized silence. Now, I know that sounds like a bit of a mouthful, but it's basically the realization that deep interior transformation and your active, everyday busy life, they don't contradict each other. Actually, they fuel each other. You don't have to flee the market square to find ultimate peace. You can actually find it right smack in the middle of all the noise. So, let me introduce you to our cast of mystical revolutionaries. We've got Meister Eckhart from the 14th century, St. Francis of Assisi from the 13th, Thomas Merton from the mid-20th century, and the contemporary thinker Richard Rohr. And what is absolutely fascinating here is that despite living literally centuries apart, these four figures converged on the exact same revolutionary truth. They all realize that ultimate reality isn't some distant object you have to reach through, rigid dogmatic isolation. It's actually a foundational presence that is already waiting to be realized right in your daily routine. To really understand how this works, we have to look at Meister Eckhart's brilliant concept, which he called the Seelenfunkeln. This translates to the spark of the soul. Eckhart argued that at the very deepest center of human consciousness, there is an uncreated, completely indestructible element. It's the part of you that is fundamentally, permanently connected to the divine. And honestly, this changes everything, because it means the solution to a bleak, overwhelming world isn't something you have to go out and acquire or buy. It is an uncreated spark that is already dwelling perfectly inside of you. So the crucial point is that for these thinkers, our whole human predicament is basically just a giant case of mistaken identity. See, there's the false self. This is your mental self-image. It's built out of ideologies, social expectations, and a very defensive ego. It's who you think you need to be. But then there's the true self, which is that primal, original I. And that self is inherently good. Spiritual growth, therefore, isn't about, racking up new moral achievements. It's really about dismantling the illusions of the false self so you can reveal the true self that was underneath all along. Eckhart taught a highly counterintuitive three-step path to do this through a process called kenosis, which means self-emptying. It's all about radical spiritual poverty. Step 1, wanting nothing. And by that he means abandoning even your own spiritual striving. Step 2, knowing nothing. That's about freeing yourself from intellectual pride and that rigid, black and white, dualistic thinking. And step 3, having nothing. Basically maintaining no internal real estate for the ego. You literally have to strip away everything you cling to in order to access that true self. Which brings us to this brilliant, honestly kind of shocking quote from Eckhart. "Lord, rid me of God." I mean, wow, right? But this perfectly captures the paradox of what's called negative theology. Eckhart is saying here that true spiritual poverty means we even have to abandon our conceptual, tightly boxed-in construct of God. Because if you think you have reality perfectly figured out in your head, that mental image is actually getting in the way of experiencing true absolute freedom. You gotta let go of the concept to actually experience the reality. Let's move to and see how this builds in the 20th century with Thomas Merton. He took this idea and ran with it. Merton described this state of deep, wordless communion and self-emptying as the golden zero. Just visualize that for a second. It represents a total emptying out of your awareness until the self becomes like a broken vessel, totally and completely open to reality. When you finally let go of that frantic desire to see, know, and taste the world purely on your ego's terms, you hit this golden zero.
and suddenly you're capable of receiving reality as a pure, unfiltered gift.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how Meister Eckhart applies this directly to everyday life by completely flipping a famous biblical story on its head, the story of Mary and Martha. So, the traditional view always said Mary, who sat quietly contemplating, was superior, right? While Martha, who was busy working and serving guests, was seen as distracted and inferior. Well, Eckhart radically inverts this. He argues Mary is actually the spiritual novice because she's attached to the sweet, emotional feeling of contemplation. Martha, on the other hand, is the mature disciple. She's so spiritually grounded that she can perform active, everyday work perfectly without ever losing her inner peace. She's incredibly active, yet perfectly still inside. St. Francis of Assisi really anchored these heavy theological concepts in a highly visual, totally practical way with his rule for hermitages. When the Franciscans lived together, Francis didn't want them splitting into two separate cliques of the workers and the prayers. No way. Instead, he made them swap roles. Half the brothers acted as active mothers managing the daily chores, and the other half lived as contemplative sons in silent prayer. And then they'd rotate. This brilliantly proved to the friars, through lived experience, that action and contemplation are not opposites at all. They are just two sides of one, unified life. Fast forward to 1958, and look at this truly breathtaking moment from Thomas Merton. So Merton was a Trappist monk, meaning he lived out in the woods in strict silence. But one day, he was just running errands at this super busy intersection of 4th and Walnut in Louisville, and he had a massive epiphany. Just looking around at the ordinary shoppers, he realized they are all walking around shining like the sun. Right there in the middle of a bustling, noisy shopping district, the illusion of monastic superiority just completely shattered for him. He realized that the divine spark is in absolutely everyone, right there on the street corner. And this brings us to the absolute climax of our whole narrative here. The gate of heaven is literally everywhere. True holiness does not require you to run away to a cloistered monastery or escape up to some remote mountaintop. The deepest, most profound spirituality can be found right in the secular, urban environment. It's in the market square, it's at your office desk, it's while you're waiting in line at the grocery store. The sacred and the secular, they are not separate things. If we zoom out a bit, we find a term that perfectly encapsulates this entire worldview: panentheism. Now careful, unlike pantheism, which says the universe literally is God, panentheism is the belief that the divine is intimately present in all things while also transcending them. Richard Rohr calls this the cosmic Christ, and St. Francis lived it out through his cosmic kinship, calling the sun his brother and the earth his sister. It implies that the entire physical universe, including the very device you're watching this explainer on right now, is a sacred text. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how unified this tradition is. Whether we're talking about Eckhart's spark of the soul, Francis's radical poverty, Merton's true self, or Rohr's unified action and contemplation, they are all mapping the exact same territory. They all agree that the divine is an innate horse self, they agree that the ego has to be emptied out through kenosis, and they firmly believe that the ultimate proving ground for this spirituality is your everyday integrated life. But what is truly beautiful, and this is impartially documented right across our sources, is that this isn't just a Christian idea. It is a universal human truth with massive interfaith overlaps. Eckhart's idea of letting go aligns perfectly with Zen Buddhism's concept of no mind, or wu sin. It mirrors Taoism's wu wei, which means non-action. And in Islamic Sufism, specifically the Chishti order, you see the exact same insistence on active contemplation. They encourage people to work honestly in trade and commerce without ever letting it interfere with their profound inner spiritual exercises. So this isn't just one tradition's idea, it is a global human awakening. Which leaves us right back where we started, standing in the busy market square of our own modern lives, with one vital question to ponder. How will you awaken to the divine spark hidden within your most mundane everyday routine? Because, look, if Eckhart, Francis, Merton, and Rohr are right, you don't need to flee the world to change it, and you certainly don't need to flee it to find peace. You just need to empty out that false self, find that dynamized silence, and realize that you and everyone else around you are already walking around shining like the sun.